Thank you very much. The title of the book that I'm reviewing is Tools of Titans. The author is a best-selling author, Tim Ferriss of the 4-Hour Week fame. What Tim Ferriss has done is to really just curate all these leaders who have had massive success in different aspects of life and, distill the learnings that he's gotten from them into this book, Tools of Titans. And so tools, referring to the tactics, their routines, their habits, most of these people are billionaires, icons, world-class performers. So really this book for me is both a leadership, a lifestyle, a personal development resource. The Tools of Titans has 3 key parts. It's been broken into 3. This book really does give you a good widespread of these tactics, resources, habits, and routines of all different types of leaders. So it's broken into 3, divided into 3 key areas. Part 1 focuses on your health, which he titled Healthy. I've got to be honest, I didn't spend a lot of time on that part, right? I was not interested in, the starter, which is the first part here, which was the health, especially since the first part of it that I opened and read, once they started talking about, all these pills and, there were just different types of concepts and principles. And honestly, for me, I like to keep it simple. I believe that with your health, make sure you eat as much natural food as possible, exercise, have good friends, good family, have positive emotions, and that's your health, my own health tips there. So I didn't spend time. Those of you who are very interested in this, you may want to explore. There are lots of very experimental health tips that are in the health part 1. But some of them, they actually come with a warning, which tells you, please do not try this at home without your doctor. And once they've given you that sort of, disclaimer, then really it's up to you to read them and apply. So let's move on to the other 2 parts. So as I said, part 1, healthy, all different, different contributors. Part 2, I particularly liked the part 2 and 3, because they're very much in line with, my core areas of interest and expertise. And so the first part 2 is on wealth, right? It's on wealthy. So I'm just gonna take a few points that I noted because I want you guys to have this very clearly. So as I said, part 1 covers health, part 2, wealth, and part 3, wise, right? So healthy, wealthy, wise, okay? And under wealthy, I read 2 key chapters, and under part 3, I read some of the contributions that were under what you would refer to as non-profile chapters. The profile chapters are really the contributions or the lessons that he distilled from these billionaires, these icons, and all of that. So that's those are the 3 key parts in this book, and I'm now going to go very quickly through some of the lessons that I pulled out from some of the specific chapters that I read that I really want to bring to your attention. Okay, so under part 2, which is under the wealthy, I looked at page 583. There was a topic on why you need a deloading phase, And then I also looked at the second chapter that I read there was on my favorite thought exercise, fear setting. Now, the first one, why you need a deloading phase on page 583, really just talks about what's happened to us all during this pandemic, that we all need time out. We all need thinking time. We all need time of, just really stepping back on the gas pedal to reduce the immense stress that we all essentially are exposed to in the course of our lives and our work and our business, and especially if you are based in Africa, especially in Lagos, Nigeria, one of the stress capitals of the world. And so, learning how to deload your life is something that I think I found very interesting. It's something that I personally practice, and I just wanted to see, what the concepts were there. So I just want to read something. So basically it's talking about how you move from a reactive living to essentially creating slack for yourself, giving yourself margin room in order to breathe. Okay, and so the pandemic has given all of us an opportunity to do that in this season. But it's something that even without a pandemic, we're encouraged, as it were, to create space in our lives to just breathe, to allow ourselves thinking time, to allow ourselves time away from work, take some days off, maybe every month, every quarter. And that's really what it is. We've talked a lot during the season about reposition, retreat, reflect. That's really what it's talking about. As simple as it is, it's a very powerful leadership tool. I personally don't trust leaders who don't take rest, leaders who don't rest. If you look at all the top, leaders and presidents, they take time out. Jesus, for most of us who are Christ followers, we know how many times, as much as he loved the crowd, he would retreat and go and, essentially deload, as it were, in order to connect with higher power, for the next season. So let me talk about the next chapter also that I read, the one about my favorite thought exercise, fear setting. I love that so much. And I'll say it very quickly. I'll talk about it very quickly, because the third one that I want to share is really where I would wrap up, okay? So on page 463, where he then shares about his favorite thought exercise, fear setting. It's really about the idea that many of us are afraid to face our fears. And so most times we have all these fears that haunt us, the fear of the unknown, and so many people are unsuccessful. So many leaders are not able to achieve their highest potential, whether for themselves, for their families, for their businesses, or whatever it is that they do. The reason they're not able to do that is because they allow fear stop them. I'm just going to read a couple quotes here where it says, "Many a false step was made by standing still." I totally loved that, because think about it, especially in 2020, we've all come into this year where we had this most amazing we had these amazing goals, go mega, no nonsense goals. We want to accomplish all these incredible things. And then the pandemic happened. And then, most people were essentially stuck. And as we speak in November, there's still people who are at a standstill. When elections come in Nigeria, people are at a standstill. People don't make business decisions. Some people don't make investments, whether it's in real estate or in the stock market, because they're constantly at a standstill because of fear of the unknown. And so for me, reading this was really interesting, because it's something that if you read that particular chapter, how to do the fear setting exercise, where you ask the question, what is the worst that can happen? Right? If you ask the right questions, you can actually then embrace your fears, and you realize that at the end of that fear, usually it's not as bad. So I like the story that he shared. I'm just going to say, where he talks about the power of pessimism, defining the nightmare. I mean, this is a concept that I personally use in my life, okay? In business and in my personal life, which is okay. I remember, and that's why when I started by introducing, I talked about how I've been diagnosed, with cancer 14 years ago. And I had to ask the question, what is the worst that can happen? And the worst that can happen is that I die. And of course, I didn't want to die. But by asking that question, I was doing the exercise that he talks about in this chapter, which is facing your worst fears. If you're in business, the pandemic has hit, and then, you ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen? My business ends in 2020. Well, guess what? You're still living, you're still breathing. The same brain that you used to create that business, you can maybe use it to reinvent yourself and create something else. So that's what I love about this chapter, because it's so relevant, especially for leaders, for entrepreneurs, for, quite frankly, anyone. So when I asked the question, what's the worst that can happen? And I faced that question and I realized, okay, well, guess what? If I die, I'll be with God. But guess what? I'm too young. I don't want to be with you yet, God. So what shall we do? And so that's where I then began to obviously get knowledge, get treatment, of course, apply faith prayers, and of course, all of the grace. And 14 years later, I'm still standing, I'm reviewing this book, and I'm truly grateful for that. But how can we apply this principle of fear setting, of embracing our fears? You want to leave a job, you want to move from one city to the other, all the fears, all the things that stop us. So that's what that chapter, I love it. It's called The Power of Pessimism, Defining the Nightmare. And Benjamin Disraeli, the former British Prime Minister, says it in this quote: action may not always bring happiness, but there is no happiness without action. I totally love that. Okay, so that's my wrap up of those two chapters under the wealthy part. Now, my favorite, where I'm going to end this, please indicate in the chat how many minutes that I have, is really, the chapter on Tony Robbins. And that was on page 210. Tony Robbins, I totally love. I just feel like there's some element of kindred spirit. I went for one of his programs many years ago in 2012, Unleash the Power Within, I think it was, with about 20-something, business leaders and all of that. So to read a chapter from, from this book, Tools of Titans, which is the book that I'm reviewing, of course, he was one of the profiles that I chose to pull out. And it was just a reminder of a lot of the principles that he teaches and he writes in his books. And so Tim Ferriss here was sharing some of the principles from Tony Robbins. And then the key one that I want to leave you with today is where he says that the key principle that Tony Robbins says that he learned from his own mentor and he teaches up until today is investing in yourself is the most important investment you will ever make. It is an investment that keeps on giving and giving and giving and giving. And Jim Rohn, so Tony Robbins says that his biggest investment, and this is, it's indicated in this book also, and that's actually what I'm reviewing, that the biggest investment he made was a $35 investment that he made to go and listen to Jim Rohn. And he heard Jim Rohn say that if you let learning lead to knowledge, you will become a fool. But if you let your learning lead to action, you will become wealthy. So it's not knowledge that leads, that empowers. It is knowledge that you take action on. And so invest in yourself. Come to this book club, reading sessions. Buy the books, but, above all, make sure that as you invest in yourself, you actually take action towards those learnings, right? The second key takeout from that particular chapter that I'd like you to note is something that I totally love. And it's quality questions, okay? Create a quality life. Like I say to my team at Fine and Country West Africa all the time, that when the quality of your questions improve, the quality of your outcomes will improve. And so that's been reemphasized in this particular chapter where he's reviewing Tony Robbins, okay? It goes on to say the quality of your life is determined by the quality of questions you ask. So questions determine your focus. Most people focus on negative questions. So they ask questions like, why did this happen to me? Well, guess what? I never asked that question, even at the height of the most difficult, adverse situation I ever faced, right? Because as a leader, you don't ask questions that disempower you. You ask questions that empower you and enable you. And so many people ask questions like, when is COVID going to end? When are they going to find the vaccine? That's great, but what if they don't find it? What do you need to do in this season? Or some people ask questions like, why did he speak to me like that? Well, guess what? Instead of worrying and being so thin-skinned, worrying why did they speak to you like that, how about asking what is the lesson they're trying to convey? So I love this because it gives you, just the mindset of a leader, of a winner, of, obviously the icons, the billionaires, the world-class performers, which is what leadership is about. Leadership is about raising your standards. Leadership is about not accepting the mediocre questions that most people are satisfied with asking themselves on a daily basis. Leadership is about raising your standards as far as your questions. And then the third and final one in that chapter is, I know I've said this so many times, but you guys can tell that I love books and I take it seriously because I apply them. And so when you apply them, you become one with it. And so this one is one that I love to teach over and over. And it's the 3 S. It's your state, your story, and your strategy, okay? Bear in mind, I said this is a buffet of like how many countries in the world? Honestly, what I've shared with you is less than 0.0% of this incredible book. And I will give you my thoughts about whether to get this book even though I'm giving you all these great lessons, in a moment. But so that your state, your story, and your strategy. Most things in life are determined by our state of mind. So if you wake up in the morning, it was the example that they were giving in this book, which starts from page 210 on the Tony Robbins lesson, that if you wake up in the morning and you're feeling like, oh, dry, oh gosh, what a day. You look out and it's dry and gray, and you proceed with that state of mind. Your first attempt to come up with a solution for a problem that is in front of you or that you need to work on is going to produce not very great outcome, because your state of mind is not positive. Your state of mind is not enabled. It's not empowered. You are in a disenabled state of mind or in a low emotional state. So it's important that, and especially for those who are on this, who are people of faith, or whatever faith you are, that when you wake up in the morning, you put yourself in a positive state, because it affects everything else. Now, what is the one way in which to then affect the state? And that's what the story is. So for those of us who are Christians, we have loads of stories. We can take the Abraham story, we can take the story of David, we can take the story of, our past successes. But the point is that you have the pen in your hands, or at least the book in your hands, and you can change your story, change what you're focusing on, change what you're reflecting on, what you're meditating on. And that storyline, what you're telling yourself about the day, can alter your state, which then puts you in an empowered state to then come up with the third S, which is then your strategy for the day or your strategy for life. Now, I've given you an example of the day, but how about we apply it to our businesses? How about we apply it to 2020, where, the pandemic may have put us in a state of fear, in a state of anxiety, in a state of distress, despair, disillusionment. How about we flip that state by thinking, guess what? The pandemic is not here. No matter how long it stays, it's not going to be here forever. Tell yourself a different story. Tell yourself that even with this pandemic, even with the slowdown in the economy, even with whatever it is that's going on, I have the power to make adjustments. I have the power and the resources, whether it's the books, whether it's the coaches, whether it's a consultant, whether it's a family circle or the friendship circles or the networks. I will look for the solutions. I have the power to do that. So, or you can deploy the quality questions that we talked about earlier. Ask the right questions and then put yourself, basically in the right state of mind to then review your business or reimagine your business. I imagine that's what happened with Laterna in coming up with this, book club virtually, right? As a result of the pandemic, obviously the stores are closed. What better way to connect, stay connected with book lovers, than to come create something virtually. But either when a state of panic and stayed in that state, then of course they will not be able to come up with this sort of solution. So we can apply these things to everything that we do. So wrapping that up, he then talks about how your state of mind affects, everything that you do. It affects, the story you tell yourself. It affects the strategy. So low state of mind, low outcomes, low strategies, right? And all of that. So I really totally love that.